one of the happiest places I've ever had, probably musically in my life, is being at any AC/DC stadium gig. Normally, I'm not a big fan of stadium gigs. I like smaller venues and up close and personal. But you get yourself in a crowd for AC/DC and Thunderstruck comes on, or for those about to rock. I mean, it is absolutely incredible to be in a crowd and they're playing those songs.
Chris Sutton, welcome back to the Booked on Rock podcast. I think this is appearance number 3.
Got to say this, Eric. This is one of the things when I finish writing the book, genuinely, I think I get to talk to Eric again.
I love it. I love it. Every time you have a book, I know it's either me reaching you or you reaching me first.
Yeah,
it's
right.
like it's a race to the who gets the first email. So yeah, total of 18 studio albums, 2 soundtrack albums, 3 live albums, 2 box sets, 57 singles. I mean, that's a daunting task. We're not talking about a band who was around for a few years. You managed to do it amazingly, and you include new interviews in this book as well. So tell us about that and what we can get in this book.
Well, a couple of things. One is I was a little bit lucky because AC/DC have had some time out at various points during the Brian Johnson years. So there should have been even more albums really in effect. As regards interviewees, that's a good question. What I do before I start every book is I make a list of everybody, engineers, producers, the band, cover illustrators, the whole lot, everyone. And I approach every single one of them as best as you can. So the ones that you see in the book are the ones who chose to be part of it and replied. And I have to say that AC/DC are probably the most closed off, if you like, difficult to reach, difficult to get a comment band that I've encountered yet. And a few people warn me about that. And it's certainly the case. And I respect that. But there you go. That's why you see who you do in the book and why other people are not there.
Yeah, it makes it more challenging. Their very first single, released July of 1974, Can I Sit Next to You, Girl, featuring lead singer Dave Evans. The version that Bond recorded with the band is available. It's hard to find this one. It's more of a T-Rex sound than any AC/DC song that we would know. But they make a change soon after that. So Dave Evans is out. They bring in a new manager. They decide Dave Evans isn't working out. And here comes Bon Scott. November of 1974, they recorded the High Voltage album, which was released in February of 75. The lead single is interesting. Love Song, Oh Gene in parentheses, sounds absolutely nothing like AC/DC. Angus hates the song, and he can't believe it was even chosen as a lead single. Thankfully, the B-side, which was a cover of Baby Please Don't Go, that was there, so DJs ended up playing that one. But what's the story behind Love Song, and why do you think the label, which was Albert Productions, chose that as the lead single?
Well, I think I know exactly why. I spoke to Michael Browning, who, as you say, was the manager who came and turned things around for them when they sacked Dave Evans and got Bon Scott. Now, Browning points out that in Australia at the time, there was a very healthy pub rock scene, bands playing in pubs and so on. There was this circuit. But there's also a very healthy pop scene that AC/DC, and this is a bit hard to believe, really, appealed to young teenage girls particularly, would turn up to their gigs. So it was simply a case of, Oh Gene, if you listen to it with the big dramatic intro and the sort of tugging at the heartstrings kind of ballad feel of it, which Bond puts on, they thought really would be picked up by this massive audience that they got in Australia of teenage girls. Now, if that had happened, if the radio stations had played Oh Gene, I don't know what AC/DC would have done, because they didn't like the song, apart from Tony Correnti, the session drummer, who picks it out as the best thing they've ever recorded.
Yeah, that's in the book.
Yeah. But it's totally atypical. As you said correctly, Angus hates the song. I think the intro's dynamic and interesting and dramatic. But it's not AC/DC as we would know them at all by any means. And you're right, they turned over and Baby Please Don't Go and so on. That's much more the AC/DC that we know. And that first album it's a good album, and there's moments on it that are excellent, but it kind of is. It sort of sets the scene, despite the terrible cover, I would say.
Yeah, they had a few covers that the head scratchers.
Mm.
We'll get to a few more too. But the album did pretty good in Australia, number 14.
Yeah, we've got to say at this point, one of the decisions I had to make in the book was which timeline, which path to follow for AC/DC. And I've gone with the Australian albums as being the true vision, which I guess they must be, because the European editions do substantially change all the way up. It's only once we reach Power Age, no, not Power Age, sorry, Highway to Hell. That's the first album where the tracks are the same across the world.
It does make it difficult going back in time, going through the AC/DC catalog. It's really sometimes it's confusing. I can't remember which song is on which album, which version. There's the Australian version, there's the US version, and then there's an example of an album that's not released in the US until years later, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you do note in the book after that first album, they step it up. They up their game with 1975's TNT. What a way to start off the album. The lead track, It's a Long Way to the Top if you want to rock and roll. Tell us about the bagpipes. There's a great story on the song in the book. Bon had some trouble setting those up in the studio.
He did. They were chatting in the studio, and you have to mention George Young, one of the older brothers of Angus and Malcolm, who really was a major guiding light in their career. And also did a lot of the arrangements with them, played bass on an awful lot of the stuff as well. And in amongst all the talking, he discovered that Bon Scott had played in a pipe band when he was younger. What Bon failed to tell him was that he'd been a drummer in a pipe band and had never actually played the bagpipes at all. And he went out and bought a set of bagpipes for 479 Australian dollars, which would be about enough to buy 2 brand new Strats at that time. So Mark Evans reckoned. And Bon just thought, I think as did Tony Iommi when we talked before, and when they did Spiral Architect, Sabbath, they were going to put bagpipes on and thought, how difficult can it be to play? Well, the answer is yes, very difficult to play. So Bon does his best at playing them. And the brilliance of George Young, not for the last time we'll say this, was to take what Bon had actually managed to get out of the bagpipes and kind of loop it so that it sounds reasonable. If you listen carefully, you can tell that this is somebody who actually can't play the bagpipes. I think it's just a series of blasts, really, most of the time.
Yeah,
that he plays. And a shout out, I think, here to Jack Black, because I think that song is just one of the big bangers in the AC/DC back catalogue. And it always used to astonish me just how little traction it had got in the live set through the years. Just seemed to vanish without trace. Then out comes School of Rock with Jack Black, and suddenly the song is straight to the top of the best AC/DC song list. I mean, people really latched onto that track. And it is. You can't put that song on and not feel up and smile, can you?
No, I know. It's a classic. I remember I got turned on to it when I was in college. That would have been early 90s. So that was before Jack Black's movie. But I just remember I had a cassette I put together, a mixtape, and I was running out of room at the end, and I had to fade out the bagpipes at the end. It was like, that was such a bummer. Yeah, yeah, that would have been cool. I don't know, maybe they've done this, but in concert, they bring out an actual bagpipe player on stage. What do they do live for this?
They had done that. I think there's some footage on one of the box sets where they did bring out some sort of pipe band to do it, but generally they didn't. It all surprised me they never did it. And say some of the Glasgow dates that you'll know of over the years.
Oh, they could have had fun with that.
And I thought that would have been an absolute banker, but no. So the song, strangely, is one that isn't there amongst the big bangers of the. When AC/DC do their live sets, as you will well know, you get 1 or 2 deep cuts, don't you? That would usually be the way of it. 2, 3 off the new album, and then the whole run of the ones you expect. I mean, maybe that'll change.
Yeah, we'll see. There's some great trivia. It's stories behind the songs in the book. One of them is for TNT, which is another AC/DC classic. George Young, when he heard Angus chanting along to the song in the studio, he was the one who suggested to add his "oi" chants in the track. So that was just like happenstance. I love stuff like that. Now the next release is the band's first international release. 1976, Atlantic signs the band to a worldwide deal, and we get the High Voltage album. Now the head of the UK Atlantic label picked tracks from the first 2 Australian releases, High Voltage charted at number 13 in Australia, 146 in the US, but their rise to the top in the US, that's coming. Next album is Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. That's also from 76 in Australia, at least. It wasn't until 1981 that it received an international release. And there are so many great songs to choose from both releases. I mean, Problem Child, Big Balls, Ride On, Jailbreak, Rocker, Squealer. But let's talk about the title track to Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. First, where did the name come from? And can you talk about this couple from Libertyville, Illinois, Norman and Marilyn White? What was their issue with this song? But we'll start with the title track and the story, where that name came from.
Well, it comes from it was a TV show in Australia that he used to watch. I think it came from America, called Beanie and Cecil. Do you know of this show?
Heard of it.
I don't. Anyway, Angus used to watch it, and he reckoned that there was a character in it called Dishonest John, and he used to carry a card around, like a calling card, which said "Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, special rates for holidays" written on it. And it was something that he'd stored away and remembered, something that amused him. So that's where the title comes from, of all these dirty deeds which Bonnie's capable of doing, as he outlines in the song itself. And right near the end of the track, as you'll probably know, is he gives his phone number, 36 24 36. And it sounds like he says 8 on the end of it, but he doesn't. He actually says "hey." But if you take 36 24 36 8, this was the phone number of Norman and Marilyn White in Libertyville, Illinois, who got so annoyed at the constant phone calls they were getting. And you said that it wasn't released in America till 81, which is true. Now, you've got to imagine now this album's selling in huger quantities than it would have done back in 76. This is going on the back of, of Back in Black. So everyone's buying this album. There's all these American fans listening to this. And I always used to ring phone numbers I would see in programs and on records. You think, I wonder who actually answers the phone.
Yeah, well, 8675309 was the big one. That was the famous one.
So they sued the band for $250,000 in damages, demanding that the song was altered. But the case was thrown out because they don't actually say the full number, which the fans had misheard in it. But you can't beat promotion like that, can you, if you're a band? That's the sort of stuff you dream of.
Man, if they had a voice message machine, I'd love to hear some of the messages that were left there. Can I talk to Bon? Is he there? Yeah, is Angus there?
Yeah.
Right. Dirty Deeds, the album charted at 5 in Australia and 3 in the US. In 1977, AC/DC released Let There Be Rock, number 19 in Australia, 17 in the UK, 154 in the US. This also has an Australian and international version with different track listings. Now, the highlights here are, of course, the title track, also a whole lot of Rosie, Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be, Dog Ate Dog, or Dog Eat Dog, Bad Boy Boogie, another great track. But we can't forget about the title track, Let There Be Rock, which is a classic live. It's a must whenever your AC/DC plays live. Now, both bassists, Mark Evans and Angus, they love this album. And Angus said, if you listen to any album from AC/DC for the first time, this is the one. Now, Mark Evans was fired by the band in May of 77, shortly after this. So now he's replaced on bass by Cliff Williams. 1978, we get Power Age. Many fans will say that this is their favorite AC/DC album. Rock and Roll Damnation, Down Payment Blues, Give Me a Bullet, Riff Raff, Sin City, What's Next to the Moon, Gone Shootin', Up to My Neck and You, and Kicked in the Teeth. Those are all 9 tracks. Now, you lead this chapter by writing, there was an intention for musical changes on this album. So what were those changes?
Yeah, well, actually, I picked this up. Angus told The Quietus in 2014 that Power Age was probably us experimenting a little bit. And I'd not seen that interview back at the time. So I went back to the album and thought, experimenting. And I think basically the only one that really stands out for me as being an experiment would be What's Next to the Moon. That does kind of stand out a little bit, quite a different vibe to it, almost verging on the psychedelic, possibly at times. Gone Shooting probably sticks out a little bit as being quite a nice sort of low-key sort of groove. And I guess there's the big kind of poppy song on there, which was the big hit single, Rock and Roll Damnation, which was written to order because the record label wanted a surefire hit, which it was over here. And they literally throw everything at Rock and Roll Damnation. They really, really do. There's insistent maracas in it, probably played by George Young. The big choruses, tambourine in it. And it was a huge success for them, really. But I think really the big breakthrough album over in Britain for them that really pushed them over was probably the live album. Now, the live albums are sequenced at the end of the book. So I think you do lose that a little bit, to be honest, because that live album was absolutely key in Britain. It really, really was. Went top 20, got to number 13. And all of the songs on it, I think the versions on If You Want Blood are all superior to the studio versions, without a doubt. It really is probably one of the greatest live albums ever made, in my opinion.
And that was released just before Highway to Hell, I think, right?
Yeah, it came out in October 78 in the UK, November 78 in America. It got to 113 in America, which probably sounds a bit ridiculous really now, but you look at that and you put that album on, play Riff Raff, and you're in from the first few notes for the ride. And then you get Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be, which actually is in tune. That's one of the things that's quite interesting. You listen to it back on Let There Be Rock, and the guitars are quite out of tune. On the version on there. One of the things I think Joe Elliott said about Mutt Lange when he comes in was one of the differences he makes. Joe Elliott said, well, he got the guitars in tune for a start. Somewhere I remember him saying that. It wasn't always that bad, in fairness. But the songs that you've mentioned earlier, Whole Lot of Rosie, Problem Child, they're all vastly superior, I think, on the live album, often elongated with long instrumental sections.
A Whole Lot of Rosie, you hear the chant Angus. Angus.
Yeah. Did you know it's not actually a live version on the album?
It's not. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because it really didn't sound authentically live. But where did the chant come from? Is that coming from an actual show?
The chant is definitely bolted on from the Glasgow show.
Well, it works.
And it's interesting because actually it's Malcolm that's playing the riff, not Angus at all. They're chanting. It's actually Malcolm. So you get that. But if you listen to anyone out there who's not sure, listen to a Whole Lot of Rosie, and you can hear that Bond's voice is pretty similar, if not the same, to what it is on the studio version. And he's completely different to the rest of the live album. I hadn't noticed, to be fair, until I started digging and talking to some other fans.
Speaking of, Power Age, I mentioned, a lot of fans will say it's their favorite. Power Age, is that your favorite? What is your personal favorite AC/DC album?
Oh,
yeah, it's a tough one.
There's a devil in you, isn't there, Eric?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what mine would be. I got like a handful I could choose.
Well, you get the best Bond, best Brian. Can you even choose between Bond and Brian sort of debate, don't you? Of the era with Bon Scott, I think Power Age has maybe, I was going to say, more authenticity, if that makes any sense at all. It's not as sculptured and molded, perhaps, as, say, Highway to Hell, which might be the next big contender that people would pick. I mean, you've got to look at Highway to Hell and say that was the big breakthrough album. So is that the best album they did with Bon Scott? But I think my problem with that album, which we'll come on to, is I think side 2 is perhaps a little bit weak on Highway to Hell, personally.
Highway to Hell from Bon, Back in Black from the Brian years. I just, you can't go wrong with either of those. And those are the ones, those are the first two. First one I got was Back in Black. Then I went and bought Highway to Hell. But it's not easy because there's so many great albums. Power Age reached 22 in Australia, 26 in the UK, but again, US 133, which is so surprising nowadays when you see how popular they are here in the States. But there was a while there where they weren't, but we know that would end with Highway to Hell. So Highway to Hell, one of the greatest albums in rock history, right? I mean, I would say in the commercial peak of the Bon Scott era, but we'll get to that side 2 comment. I'm interested in that. 1979's Highway to Hell, number 17 in the US, 8 in the UK, and 13 in Australia. Atlantic in America wanted an album that was going to break through, and they finally get it. They replaced George Young and his producing partner, Harry Vanda, with Mutt Lange on this one. But it's interesting because Mutt Lange wasn't the first choice. They
No.
wanted to go with Eddie Kramer, who was known for his work with Hendrix and Led Zeppelin, and he also produced Ace Frehley's solo album. Who he was known for quite a few artists, so certainly wasn't a bad choice, but it just didn't feel right with Angus and Malcolm. So they got Mutt Lange in instead, and it's magic. I mean, there's something happened there. Now here are the 10 tracks: Highway to Hell, Girls Got Rhythm, Walk All Over You, Touch Too Much, and I think Beating Around the Bush is the final song on side one.
Yeah.
Okay, so side two: Shot Down in Flames, Get It Hot, If You Want Blood, You've Got It, Love Hungry Man, and Night Prowler.
Yeah.
Where do you hear the biggest difference sonically on this album with Mutt Lange? Because you mentioned Girls Got Rhythm as a revealing song for the differences that he made.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned Eddie Kramer, and Eddie Kramer you'd have thought would have been a shoo-in to work with them with his rock credentials. I suspect the band was still quite sore being forced to jettison their brother George and Harry Vander as producers. And when you come in with Lang, I mean, as Browning said to me, Michael Browning, the manager, he doesn't really have any rock credentials at all. He had to keep it quite quiet from the band that Lang had produced the Boomtown Rats, for example, because if he told them that, they'd go, no, forget it, we're not even going to work with the guy. But what Lang does do is to give AC/DC a kind of a spit and a polish, and make them more radio friendly and acceptable to a wider audience. Now, by that, what I'm talking about is bands like AC/DC, Van Halen, and any other bands. You have a core audience, which is people like me and you, and we buy everything, and we're there. And then you pull in all these other people who aren't so bothered. You know, they'll hear the single on the radio or whatever, and like casual, but they'll fill in all those millions of people who buy the records, but they won't go back and buy over 6 or 7 albums before it, probably. They'll just be in for that one. Kind of like with ZZ Top's Eliminator. I know so many people who bought Eliminator, but didn't go back and buy any of the other early albums at all. So I think what Lang does for a start, the thing you notice is the choruses are so strong with Lang. The backing vocals are so tuneful. And the whole thing, every AC/DC album has these big backing vocals on the choruses, you know, where you see Malcolm and Cliff come forward on stage to do the vocals. And if you go before this album, that's not really the case. There's moments when they get these big gang backing vocals, but it becomes a massive feature of the sound from Highway to Hell onwards. The title song itself, you can almost see them walking up to hit those backing vocals when they come to the chorus in your head. And that's the difference. And he sweetens the sound a little bit, not too much, I would say. I think for me, Highway to Hell's a little bit of a hybrid album. Don't think Lang goes as far with the sound as he does on Back in Black, or it's a change in the studios or something. I think there's still a little bit of rawness going on at times on the Highway to Hell album that's certainly smoothed out, and I think and largely gone by the time they get to Back in Black. That's having spent so long listening to the albums recently, again and again and again. But that's what I'm picking up. And tracks like Girls Got Rhythm, Touch Too Much, are probably a little more commercial with a small C than AC/DC would generally be used to. And I notice this because I listen to Girls Got Rhythm and I'm okay with it. Then in comes Walk All Over You, and I'm more sold on that. I'm more in for the ride with that one.
Yeah.
And that reminds me more of what I like on AC/DC. And I'd said to you that I have a little problem with side 2.
Yeah, tell me about that. Yeah, Shot Down in Flames, Get It Hot, If You Want Blood, You've Got It, Love Hungry Man,
Yeah.
Night Prowler.
Well, Angus has picked Love Hungry Man as one of his least favourite AC/DC songs for a start. And again, there's Lang influence on that. And I really like Love Hungry Man, but I'm not necessarily sure that it fits on an AC/DC album. I think it depends what mood I'm in when I've got up or what I'm doing when I listen to it. Get It Hot, I'm not so keen on at all. And I'm not sure about Night Prowler either, to be honest. I don't necessarily see it as the best end to an album that it could have been.
Yeah. Love Hungry Man's got an interesting bass line from Cliff Williams.
Definitely. Oh, it has. It really, really has. But Angus apparently listens to it, you know, and thinks, oh, really, that was going a bit far, maybe on what we should have been doing.
Yeah, I was just listening to Bryan Adams' album that Mutt Lange produced. Like, I guess if you listen to enough music from that era that, especially when Mutt Lange was producing albums, you could just tell, like Pyromania, well, Highway to Hell and Back in Black, but Pyromania and Hysteria and Wake Up the Neighbors was Bryan Adams. The gang vocals, that's a big thing for Mutt.
Well, he's also on there as well. Let's give the guy credit. If
Yep.
you're listening, you start to tune in. And I'd say to anyone listening to this podcast, go and listen to Highway to Hell or Back in Black. Listen to it 4 or 5 times on the trot. And suddenly you start to get things that you've either shut down on or ignored because of familiarity, maybe. But he's there. You can hear Mutt Lange clear as day on the backing vocals. He's the top voice. And he's, let's be honest, he's the best singer in the backing vocal. You can tell.
He's a hard interview to get, though. He doesn't do
Impossible.
interviews. Yeah.
No, I got hold of someone close to him and no reaction at all. And the same actually, and while we're on it, I didn't think I'd get Brian or the Youngs or any of those people. So the people I tended to go with those more on the fringes. Mike Fraser was a complete surprise to get interviewed.
That's a great one.
Michael Browning, I didn't expect that either.
Yeah.
So he was really good to talk to. But they're very, very closed off, as I said, very contained.
Yeah, just the fact that you were able to get some people within their circle was impressive. Fraser has a great story that I'm thunderstruck. I want to ask you about that. It's one of my favorite stories. But let's go back now to 1979 into 1980, and the story is well known. We know what happens to Bon. February 19th, 1980. He's only 33. Acute alcohol poisoning. Coroner classified it as death by misadventure. 32-year-old Brian Johnson, singing in the band Geordie, also had a little business. I think it was a vinyl car roof fitter in England. I think that was the business he had. I've also heard that he was living at home. He was living at home with his parents, just trying to make ends meet. And he gets the call to audition for a gig in March of 1980. Don't tell him what it's for, who the band is. He just shows up, and sure enough, he walks in, and I think he saw Malcolm and Angus and the guys shooting pool. And he's like, okay, I think this is for AC/DC. And he gets the gig. We know that. Back in Black, 1980. And the numbers don't lie. It sold an estimated 50 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling albums in music history, 4th best-selling album in the U.S. Now, here's a wild stat. The best-selling album that never reached the top spot on the American charts. It reached number 7. It was number 1 in Australia and the UK, but not the U.S. 10 tracks, all stellar, with 1, maybe even 2 being timeless songs that will they'll live past us. That would be, I would say, Back in Black, and definitely You Shook Me All Night Long. So here's the full track listing now. Hell's Bells, Shoot to Thrill, What Do You Do for Money, Honey? Or What Do You Do for Money, Honey? Giving the Dog a Bone, Let Me Put My Love Into You, finishing side 1. Side 2, Back in Black, You Shook Me All Night Long, Have a Drink on Me, Shake a Leg, and Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution. There are so many great stories in the book. Let me just pick one. What's the story behind Hell's Bells in terms of the lyrics and the bell?
Yeah, well, the bell. I mean, that was an interesting thing. I mean, I remember coming back and putting the album on, and there was something, as soon as you heard that bell, to me, AC/DC, Highway to Hell, Bon, here we are with Brian. I'm sitting at home putting this on. And, the impact of this record on that first day was immense. Somehow the band it was, to me, it was like they'd grown up or something and it had gone to a next level that they couldn't get to. Suddenly they were right there with a terrific set of songs, as you just said. It opens up with Hell's Bells, which is a very brave, kind of powerful tribute to Bon. As soon as you hear that tolling bell, it was quite affecting. I remember the first time to open with that was very clever. And they approached the Taylor Foundry in Loughborough in Leicestershire to make a bell. And they ended up making a 1-ton bell tuned to E, which was then pitch corrected to C for the recording. The original plan was to record the Loughborough World War I Memorial Carillon set of bells, but they couldn't do that because the pigeons kept coming out and making a noise and they couldn't get rid of them.
I love that story.
So in the end, they did use the bell recorded at the Foundry and live. And I keep checking out. I think originally it was an actual bell that Brian used to ring in 81 is what it isn't anymore. They use a recording, don't they? But I think originally it did used to actually make a noise, as I remember it, the bell. And it's interesting because Brian's track record of actually writing songs with Geordie, the band he was in over here, who were kind of a pop rock band in the vein of Slade or Sweet, if you like. He hadn't really had a track record of writing lyrics really at all. I think he'd written about 9 songs or co-wrote them. And he does actually say in his own book that he had writer's block on arrival, and a tropical storm hits Compass Point Studios where they're recording in the Bahamas. And Brian Lang commented on it being rolling thunder. And Brian said they called it in Britain, and he went off and, basically said he was giving a weather report, in terms of the lyrics. But it is an immensely powerful opening track. I've got to say at this point, that if you look at the track list for that album, Back in Black, it constantly amazes me when you go back on side 2. You open with Back in Black, which I think is quite kind of amusing. You've turned the record over, you're back, that kind of thing. But You Shook Me All Night Long, now the song has risen to the way it looks to me almost buried on side 2, track
Right.
2 with it. You think it would be side 1 right near the top
Yeah, because
somewhere.
that's what they used to do back in the day. They'd stack a lot of the hits up front on the first side.
And I looked at people say, oh, it isn't the best AC/DC album. There's other better albums. I looked through all this and I listened to this album again and again and again. I thought, do you know what? It is the best, really, I think. Generally, I don't think the numbers lie. I think that there really is magic or alchemy, or given the amount, the very short period of time they had to record this album, it is. And the backstory of Bon having passed away.
Yeah.
Before.
Yeah. We didn't mention that. It was like within the same year, within months, like just 2-3 months time, they were back in the studio, or they were at least rehearsing or auditioning new singers. Because the parents of Bon told Angus and Malcolm, move forward.
They did. I mean,
He died
died in February. They recorded it April till May, and that wouldn't have been the whole of April
Wow.
till May. And then it was released in July. I mean, that's extraordinary.
Wow.
To come out of an album with that quality.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason is possibly because I think Malcolm and Angus had always written lyrics as well as Bon. I'm sure they chipped in and did bits. So they had always written lyrics to some degree. And Michael Browning was adamant that Back in Black was he said that's got to be a Malcolm title. That looks exactly like a Malcolm title to me.
Yeah. And of course, there's the story of, did Bon write lyrics or not? And that's what I want to ask you when we get to You Shook Me All Night Long. But before we get to that one, Back in Black, the title track, there's a story Angus tells that you put in the book of the origins of this one. Malcolm came up with the riff, but he wasn't convinced it was good enough. That's amazing. Yeah. I think it was on acoustic too, initially.
He'd been sort of playing around with it for about 3 weeks or so, and he apparently came into Angus one night and said, "Have you got your cassette? Can I record this? Can I put it down? While it's in my head, it's driving me mad, and I won't get any sleep till I put it on cassette." And he said to Angus, "What do you think of this? I don't know if it's crap or not." But what Malcolm came up with is one of probably the catchiest big bass riffs in rock music ever written. Now, my youngest daughter, Nuala, I'll give her a shout out here, and she's quite right. She says, you cannot walk down a street or anywhere and have Back in Black on your headphones or whatever and not feel pumped up and live and ready for anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what's so great about AC/DC's music. It always manages to do that for me. But a song like that, undeniable. Undeniable. I think it was on acoustic when he put it on I may have heard wrong, but I recall, I think on the cassette tape, it was on acoustic. Yeah, that's amazing that Malcolm I don't know if it's good enough. Yeah, it's good enough. Yeah, and You Shook Me All Night Long. So this is where I want to get to the controversy. Did Brian write all the lyrics? Some, none, and there has always been those who believe that the lyrics on this album came from Bon Scott's notebook. Okay. So you do address this in the book. What's been the story regarding that, and what do you believe is true?
Well, the situation is this: is definitely Bon Scott used to make notes and come up with ideas, catchphrases, things he heard, and write them down. And we know this is a fact because there are people who saw that book he would carry around with him. One of them was a guy who used to write for Kerrang and Classic Rock, Malcolm Dome. Now, he says he'd seen this notebook, and not long before Bon died, and he swears blind that he actually saw some notes written in the book. And one of the lines that he saw written down that caught his eye was, she told me to come, but I was already there. And he was absolutely adamant on this. And it does sound like the sort of thing Bon Scott would write. Then Brian actually said in 2021, he told Absolute Radio that Malcolm and Angus said, we got a song, we got a title, and the title is You Shook Me All Night Long, which means that Malcolm and Angus must have come up with, obviously, the title, or possibly Bond did, but certainly Brian didn't. So Brian is basically, he says if you listen to the chords, it all kind of falls into place what lyrics he would use. And he says so that he just wrote the lyrics to fit that. But the problem really is, it's twofold. One is that AC/DC's lyrics do get noticeably, shall we say, a bit more simpler, maybe as the years go on. There's less cleverness. I mean, Bon Scott was very much a wordsmith and was very clever with the way he would phrase things and say things and put things across. And that does really go as the band go on. So would they have used Bon Scott's notes when they're in this situation where he's passed away in February? They haven't got long. You've got a new singer who's only written or co-written 9 songs. You've got Malcolm and Angus who can certainly write lyrics. Well, we'll see that later on. You can see the kind of stuff that they tend to come up with. Would they have used some notes and phrases from Bon Scott? And I honestly think, personally, no evidence, I think they probably would. Why would you not do that?
And I don't even know why you need to keep it a secret. Why not?
Well, I think the trouble is it goes with the credits on the album.
The publishing.
The publishing. All songs Young Johnson. And that's what it says.
But haven't they secretly, the story is, I think Malcolm Dome talked about this, or maybe it was,
yeah.
Oh boy. It was in another book, that they were giving Jesse Fink, and Jesse was on this podcast, and he talked about it, and it's in his book, that they secretly gave publishing to the Bon Scott family.
Yeah, I must give a big shout out. Jesse Fink's 2 books on Bon Scott and AC/DC are essential reads if you're a fan. Now, you might disagree with some things he says, which would be your right to do so.
Well, he talked about it here. He had some death threats. I mean, he had some fans who were not happy with what he wrote, but his intent was not to stir things up. He just was looking to find out the truth. Again, I go back to that would have been, I think it would have been a nice story to say that Bond wrote some of the lyrics and just put them on the publishing, and it would have been, I thought it would have been cool.
I would have thought so too, but we have another situation. We have a couple of situations going along where things aren't perhaps quite what you might expect them to be as regards their publishing and credits, I would say. But that's probably a big one. But they obviously felt, we want to move forward. This is the band now. We don't want to sort of look as though we're relying on some, I don't know.
Credibility. They want to make sure that people know Brian is, they don't want to make people think Brian is not capable of writing the lyrics. Maybe that's what they were thinking.
Something like that. But I have looked at the lyrics because I'd read Jesse's book, so I've gone through them, and I do think he's right. I think as you go on, the kind of the cleverness and the wordplay definitely does go as they go on.
Yeah.
I would.
Chris Sutton, he's the author of AC/DC, Every Album, Every Song. March 29th, it's out in the UK. Here in the US, May 31st. So high expectations for the follow-up to Back in Black. In 1981, AC/DC released For Those About to Rock, and it hit #1 in the US. First #1 in the US. #3 in both Australia and the UK. Let's Get It Up and the title track were the singles. We know Angus was inspired by a book he was reading about gladiators, and it's likely Daniel Mannix's 1958 book, Those About to Die.
Yeah.
Talk about that in the book. But those cannons going off, we still don't know where they were recorded. There's a mystery on that.
Yeah, there is. I mean, the book, it took me a while to dig this out, but as soon as I knew that Ridley Scott had based the whole of Gladiator on Daniel Mannix's book, and then I looked at the publishing history of it and any other books on gladiators, Daniel Mannix's book, For Those About to Die, I would think he's certainly the one Angus must have read. It's one of AC/DC's biggest songs. I get the hairs stand up on my neck every single time I hear it from that intro. Every time. I mean, it just gets to you. It really, really does. My only problem on the intro of the song actually is Brian. A bit of controversy. I don't like the bit he does before he does his first line, where it sounds like he's standing at the side and kind of scatting and joining in. When he comes in with a stand up and be counted for what you're about to receive, I think it's great, but I wish they'd just left him alone until that point. Just let the intro be instrumental. I spoke to the engineer, Dave Thoner, who worked on it. I thought I'm going to find out how the cannons were done. And he just outright refused. It's a trade secret. We're never going to tell anyone how the cannons were created. And that made me interested. I thought, so they didn't actually record cannons, maybe? Is it something like that? I don't know. But they're notoriously difficult to get on record. There's some on Alice Cooper's Hello Hooray right at the end that you can only barely hear if you know they're there. And I remember the Boston Pops, who were an orchestra in America, and they did the 1812 Overture of Tchaikovsky. And there's a whole bit on the back of the LP which my dad had about how difficult it had actually been to record cannons and make them sound like cannons rather than something pathetic or, but it's amazing. And another point I wanted to make here is you listen to that song, and there's probably a lot of people who haven't. Go back and listen to the studio version. The thing that hits you is how much more kind of slow it is. You listen to the live versions, and it's played with a much greater ferocity and tempo than the original version is.
I got to listen to the two. Yeah, line them up. Yeah, the energy of that song is, I can imagine when they're live. But yeah, that's cool. It's another one of the AC/DC mysteries. It's old school. Old school. You got to have a little mystery. 1983's Flick of the Switch followed, number 15 in the US, 3 in Australia, 4 in the UK. Mutt Lange was gone. The band wanted this one to be as raw as possible. Guns for Hire, Flick of the Switch, and Nervous Shakedown are the singles. Mixed response from audiences and critics, right? Because Martin Popoff, the author, was on. He actually he loves the album, but okay. I know those who don't. They just feel it's a little too, maybe too rushed. I don't know. The sales of the album weren't good. What do you think of the album? I maybe not too rushed, but maybe, I don't know. Maybe it just it lacked the production guidance of a Mutt Lange, but that they wanted it to be raw. They wanted it to be like spur of the moment. Let's just turn the mic on, turn the gear on, and let's go.
I believe that Lange was originally going to do the album and things fell through, but they'd spent so many months in the studio doing For Those About to Rock with Lange's kind of, as you'll know, precision recording techniques, and let's try that again, let's try that again, try that again. But of course, back in those days, which are the point I've made on previous chats with yourself, you didn't know this. You would get a review in the press if you saw it, that would tell you what you're going to get. But by and large, guys like me, we bought the album blind because we loved the band, and then you found out what you got. So if you were one of these millions of say American fans who'd coming with Highway to Hell, Back in Black, For Those About to Rock, yeah, you're going to get a big shock when you put Flick of the Switch on, because suddenly you're thinking, well, what's going on here? I mean, it's raw from the first track, Rising Power. And I love Rising Power. I think AC/DC actually have had this tremendous thing of having a terrific song as the opening track on their album. I love Rising Power. I think the album's, it is very raw, so it does lack some of the subtleties that perhaps Lange would have put in. But I think it's a strong set of songs. I think the songs are as strong as For Those About to Rock, but they don't have the production finesse, that's for sure. It really, really doesn't. In fact, there was trouble recording it because they had to redo Brian's vocals. It was originally recorded back at Compass Point in Nassau with Malcolm and Angus apparently producing it.
That's where they recorded Back in Black, and I think they recorded for Those About to Rock there too.
Let me have a look. I'm just going to think where was For Those About to Rock recorded. I think it was certainly. They might have gone to New York for some of that. I think possibly Paris, mostly in Paris, For Those About to Rock. So I think it's a good album, Flick of the Switch. I think there's some great songs. There's some that are a bit pedestrian, perhaps. We were talking earlier about the lyrics possibly going down a bit, and there's certainly some examples of that on this Brain Shake, for example. Deep in the Hole, there's scarcely any lyrics on those tracks, really, other than the title.
Yeah, I was just going to say I had my mic muted. I was talking there and you couldn't hear me. Just my lips are moving. But the AC/DC sound, it's so addictive. So just to get back to a flick of the
Mm.
switch. I mean, just there, so I can listen to any AC/DC album really, just because the sound is just so mesmerizing to me. So I can't say a bad thing about any AC/DC album as a whole. But with flick of the switch, yeah, there are songs that I will skip over. But still,
Yep.
I think I appreciate the effort that they made. They wanted it to be raw. They wanted it to, even the videos I think were very simple, if I recall correctly, just black and white, them in the studio, I think, making the
I
video.
thought, I thought the cover was one of the big problems of the album, Eric. I mean, again, back in the day, covers were so vital. You'd look at the album and think, oh, yeah,
Right.
great. But there's nothing to me about that cover that makes me think,
Yeah.
great, I want this.
Pretty simple. It's like almost like a drawing, like a pencil drawing.
It is. And
Yeah.
I think maybe it sounds ridiculous, maybe if the cover had been better or bigger, maybe it might have made the album feel more like something better than it was to some people. I don't know.
Mm.
But there's some great songs on there. There really is. I like Nervous Shakedown very much. I'm sure
Yes.
you do.
One of my all-time favorites. Yeah, from the Brian era. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
it's funny too. You talked about in those days you bought the album blind. I've heard Kiss fans talk about buying a ticket to go see Kiss, and it turns out Ace wasn't even there. It was Vinnie Vincent in the Ankh makeup. That's what it was like back then. It
Yes,
was
it
just
was.
you just even in the newspapers, the advertisement had Ace's picture on it. It was a whole different era. Now you have to actually make an effort to not get online and spoil it, because if you're going to go to see a concert, you can find out what the set list is going to be. You could ruin the surprise on your own. So we've come that far to where you can know whatever you want to know ahead of time. Whereas back in those days, it was all a surprise.
Absolutely. I mean, some bands, Black Sabbath, talk about, that they suffered with technical ecstasy because of punk, which hadn't even really happened in the UK when it came out. But everyone I know who bought that album bought it because we like Sabotage. It's simple as that.
Yeah,
You buy in and you think, oh, I like that one. I'm going to go again.
yeah, yep. So AC/DC as we get now more into the 80s, they remain one of the biggest touring acts the rest of the decade. But the albums, you could say, they result in uneven results. 1985's Fly on the Wall came next. They
Yeah.
released the song Who Made Who for the Stephen King film Maximum Overdrive and put it on a soundtrack/best of album called Who Made Who. 1988's Blow Up Your Video was the last of the decade. They fared well on the charts, sold well. And this goes back to what you're saying, just being a huge AC/DC fan, the sound of AC/DC, I can enjoy those albums, and I find quite a few of them that I like. Sink the Pink, Shake Your Foundations. I love Who Made Who, Heat Seeker come to mind. What do you think of the second half of the 80s output from AC/DC?
Yeah, got to mention, got Big Gun as well, haven't we?
Big
Which
Gun,
is,
was that 90s? Big Gun would have
yeah,
been,
yeah.
yeah, that would have
But
been 90s.
I think where I'm going with that is that for me, it's the era without Phil Rudd, is the way I
Yeah,
like to think as well. And I think he was a huge. It's not to decry Simon Wright's efforts and Chris Slade's efforts, who were both fine drummers, but the sound of AC/DC, for me, you've got to have Phil Rudd in
I
there.
hear you. Yeah, it's
I
very
do
evident.
absolutely.
I don't like
Flying the
Chris
Wall.
Slade's drums on Razor's Edge, and he's an awesome drummer. He's a phenomenal. I just don't let it. It just proves that it's not that easy what Phil Rudd was and is doing.
That's interesting you say that, because I was nervous about saying that myself at times. Yeah,
Because
because
yeah, I
he
mean
is an
Chris Slade's a
absolute.
brilliant drummer, man. I love him. The Firm, he's phenomenal. But it's just a certain sound, a tightness to the Phil Rudd sound. Yeah, I
Yeah, I think they start to struggle a little bit with. I mean, maybe there was a drop off in audience and sales. I mean, Fly on the Wall's production is pretty rough, to say the least, I would say. But then you got Who Made Who, which is a great song. I mean, I think that kind of brought them back a bit. Blow Up Your Video is a good album, but it's got Heat Seek, and you'll see this going on there with track one. That's your go-to track often on an AC/DC album. Heat Seeker. I love that song very much indeed.
there's
Um,
more on that album I like too. Rough Stuff I like.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's another great
But
song.
Malcolm, we should know too. Malcolm was having his problems with alcohol, so he
Yeah.
wasn't as fully focused or even part of the picture as we get towards the end. of the
Yeah,
decade.
Razor's Edge. There's the other thing you see with AC/DC where you get this comeback album thing. AC/DC are back. I think Razor's Edge was one of the times I started to hear this, and it was only 2 years since they'd been away when they come out with Razor's Edge after Blow Up Your Video. And there's some great stuff. The title track on Razor's Edge I really like
Yeah, let's
a
go
lot.
there. Yeah, let's go with let's yeah,
Absolutely got
1990 Razor's Edge. Yeah, big comeback. Thunderstruck, Are You Ready? Money Talks, all the hit singles. But yeah, it was a comeback. The album goes to number 2 in the US, 4 in the UK, 3 in Australia. But yeah, there are changes that the band made. Talk about that. Sober Malcolm makes a huge
Oh,
difference,
yeah.
but also lyrically now there's a decision made on this.
Oh, yeah. At the time, I remember this vividly. We were told, it was in the press that Brian was going through a divorce and couldn't focus on doing the lyrics and so on. So Malcolm and Angus were going to be responsible for the lyrics, and the music as well. But then in 2022, Brian gives an interview to Rolling Stone and says it was a management decision. It wasn't anything to do with me. And in his words, it was, listen, Brian, I think the boys are going to write all the lyrics now. And he says he didn't mind. I mean, which is very big of him because it means he's now out of the publishing picture completely. Everything goes to Angus and Malcolm in terms of the songwriting. Although later on he does claim to write some lines still. Famous, there's one on Black Ice we'll come to where he claims to have written one of the lines. So I would imagine he still chipped in, but didn't get any publishing for it.
Yeah, Jesse Fink, I remember saying on this podcast that he felt it was just for publishing reasons. That was his opinion.
It's a bit hard. I can see why he says that, and it's hard to disagree, isn't it? Really.
Yeah. So
it does look a lot like that.
tell me this story. I've heard it. I've read it. It's in one of the books I have about Thunderstruck and Fraser and Angus with the cigarette in his mouth, recording the guitar part, which, by the way, folks, is all one take. That's Angus, man. Yeah.
When I did this book, one thing I noticed was AC/DC actually don't talk about their songs very much in interviews. They'll talk about 1 or 2 songs per album at most. Otherwise, it's a case of, here's our new album. This is what we've put out. But so I thought there'd be loads of comments on lots of the songs. There just isn't in interviews anyway. But so Angus, basically on the Blow Up Your Video tour, is visiting his wife's parents who live in Holland, as you may know. And he's traveling there after the Stockholm gig in March '88. And his aircraft gets struck by lightning en route. And fortunately, they landed without any problems. But it's from that he got the idea of writing, coming up with what became Thunderstruck as a practice thing on the guitar. You can hear that it's probably a practice thing to limber up on if you think about it. And he thought it was interesting, put it down, gave it to Malcolm, who thought, yeah, this has really got something, this. So Angus goes away, comes back, by which point they've worked out an arrangement and everything. And Mike Fraser picked it out as one of the best moments recording he ever had with AC/DC. Mike was engineer and co-producer on that album. And they thought that there should be some kind of an intro, and Angus had got the idea for it and wanted to try it, and sits on a stool with his guitar, lights his cigarette. They start the tape rolling, and Angus starts playing that wiggly, 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 that famous line. And it was only supposed to be on the intro, says Fraser. That was it. And then the song would come in. But he just kept going. Angus just keeps going and going and going. Doesn't even take the cigarette out of his mouth. All the way to the end. Even does the slow down without having to do that separately. Slows it down naturally to stop. And he's still got this long ash of smoke balanced on the end of the cigarette that's still in his mouth. Now, if it was me or you and we smoked, I'd be sat there like this, nervously trying to get through it and get it right. Not Angus. Like the cigarette, do the job done.
In the zone.
Amazing.
I love that story. And Fraser said, yeah, it's all one take. I mean, they fade down throughout the song, but there's no splicing together. There's no studio magic. It's all one take. So now, next time you listen to that song, you guys are listening to this now, just keep that in mind. One take. Angus, the man. Yeah, that puts AC/DC back in the game, Razor's Edge. And all of the classic songs they now have at this point, I mean, they're a huge concert draw. So they released the live album shortly after that. Now, studio albums, they released one more in the 90s. That's 95's Ball Breaker, which is produced by Rick Rubin, which I don't think they had a great experience. On YouTube, there's
No.
audio of Malcolm and Angus talking about each album, and they
Yeah.
did not have a great experience with that. But the title track I love, Hard as a Rock, Hail Caesar, and Cover You in Oil were the three singles. Number one Australia, 6 UK, 4 US. Then they kick off the 2000s with Stiff Upper Lip, number 7 in the US, 12 in the UK, 3 in Australia. The singles, Stiff Upper Lip, Safe in New York City, Satellite Blues. Safe in New York City, I think they just pulled. That was shortly after 9/11. Remember they pulled
Yeah.
the song in the video. It would be
Yeah.
8 years until we get another studio album. 8 years. What were the reasons for the delay?
Well, I mean, they really had come back, and the band were going great. We got Phil Rudd back with Ball Breaker, which was, an absolute joy to fans like myself.
Love the
But
title
basically,
track.
oh yeah, I mean, I think there's that era of AC/DC Ball Breaker, Stiff Upper Lip. I love those albums. I mean, some people say that they're not as good, but for me, I can listen to those albums all day long.
Yep.
Great songs, the groove, the feel, the
Yep.
riffs.
It's
Uh,
AC/DC, man. You're getting what you're expecting. You get what you want. Yeah. The great riffs.
But as you said, it had been 8 years. So you're thinking, I mean, it was a shock when the album came out, but they'd left Atlantic Records in 2002 and had signed a multi-album deal with Epic. And obviously the band take time off anyway between tours. But the major delay seemed to come because there were changes in Sony, which saw the band shifted from their imprints of Epic to Columbia. But the big one is probably Cliff Williams. Again, I don't remember hearing about this at the time, and I looked, but apparently he had a serious accident in 2005 when he'd taken a bit of a tumble, put his hand out to break his fall, and had landed on some broken glass, and it cut the nerves and tendons in his left hand. And he had to have 2 surgeries, a lot of rehab, 18 months that he was out for. And in 2021, he said that he can still only play with 2 fingers, the 2 on the
Mm.
outsides. The 2 middle fingers he keeps out of the mix. He can make flexibility, but he can't make a fist, but he can't bend those fingers individually. And I don't remember hearing at all about that
No,
at the time.
no. And credit to the guys. They waited it out. They could have replaced them and moved forward quicker, but they waited.
It is to their credit. I mean, it basically, according to the Youngs, they got around 60 to 70 song ideas. And that's worth keeping in your mind at this moment. 60 to 70 songs by the time they go into the Black Ice sessions.
Which
And
would
we'll see
pay
why.
off ultimately with the sad
Oh, yeah.
passing of Malcolm.
So, and they pick 18 was the idea. In the end, they were going to pick 11 out of 18. In fact, they opted for 15 songs, which is the longest AC/DC
Yeah,
album.
Black Ice you're talking about.
But
Yeah, yeah. You
Black
said too
Ice,
many,
yeah.
too many. But there was also issues with Atlantic, right? They signed with Sony during
Yeah.
that. Okay, the
Yeah.
Sony Music imprint, Epic Records. Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah. So there's a
Black
big
Ice,
delay.
too many tracks. Yeah, there are a lot of 15 in all. Some great tracks on it, but yeah, that was your comment in the book. Too many songs. Could have been their best since Back in Black, you say.
It's a strong album. It's a very, very strong album, and credit to them for putting out an album that was so long, I guess. But if it was, say, back down to say, 8, 10 songs, if you can imagine that and picking that from Black Ice, it would obviously make it a stronger album because to some extent, if you're going to have 15 songs, there's got to be some weaker ones in the mix somewhere, you would think. And I think there is on Black Ice. There are some that for me aren't great. And I think if you took them out, the album would have been a stronger album.
Here's a theory, just putting it out there, because it was during Black Ice that Malcolm's dementia first started. Do you think
Correct.
they figured, let's just put as many as we can on the album because we don't know how much longer Malcolm can contribute?
Yeah, well, again, the silence from the band, you pick up things now. I think in the book, I actually was writing this book on a train. A lot of this book was written on trains.
On a rock and roll
And
train?
a guy sat next to me and
Sorry.
said, he said, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I told him what I was doing. And he turned out he'd worked as crew at various concerts and stuff. And he told me that there was another person backstage on the Black Ice tour with guitar, just in case Malcolm couldn't play.
Oh, wow.
And that
Yeah.
I have no evidence other than what he told me, but I can see that would be credible. Apparently, the guy was struggling with trying to remember the set.
Yep.
And fair play to him. I mean, he's the governor and driver of the band, and he got through it. But you could be right, back to your point, that maybe that's why the album is so long. They just wanted to get everything out there and go out with a bang, or whether they were expecting or knew that would be the last one with Malcolm, and this would be his last tour. I think maybe probably they did, I suspect.
Possibly, right? Yeah. I made a bad joke there with Rock and Roll Train, but yeah, that was the lead single. And that's a great song. That went to number one on Billboard's Hot Mainstream Rock Tracks chart. The album, number one in the US, number one in the UK and Australia. I mean, that was considered another comeback album. And then the dementia we talked about during that period develops with Malcolm. So how do they end up making the next album, which is Rock or Bust, which is 6 years later? You address this in the book. Can you talk about that and the new member of the band with a familiar last name?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the problem that AC/DC got was how to carry on without Malcolm, and what they actually did, or the way they looked at it, was to bring in Stevie Young, who was their nephew, and had actually stood in for Malcolm back on the Blow Up Your Video tour, the American dates when Malcolm was battling, as you said earlier, with his alcoholism. And they actually said that a lot of fans didn't know that Malcolm wasn't there, because, of course, they don't introduce the band on stage or anything. So what you got was somebody looking very much like Malcolm, standing in Malcolm's spot, and I think a lot of the audience wouldn't have thought any different of it. And Stevie certainly does play like Malcolm. What surprised me, I think, was how strong an album they'd managed to come up with, really, after Malcolm had gone. I think Rock or Bust was way better than I expected it was going to be,
Play
because I thought,
Ball is on
I
there.
didn't realize how, yeah, Play Ball's great. The title track, which has a somewhat firm nod to Back in Black in the riff for me, is a great song. I like that one very much. Sweet Candy, yeah, I like that too.
Big
Some great
Jack. Oh
songs.
no, I'm sorry. The Big Jack was on Black
Yeah.
Ice. Sorry.
So
Yeah.
it's a really good tribute. But notice also that the publishing credits are Angus and Malcolm Young writing everything. Whether Malcolm had left any lyrics behind, or whether Angus wrote all the lyrics, and all that Malcolm contributed was some riffs and bits and parts, but he still gets equal publishing by the
Yeah.
look of it with Angus. So these are clearly, or obviously, leftovers that hadn't made it onto Black Ice. But Angus took great pains to say that has always been the case with AC/DC. There's always been stuff they haven't used and have looked at again. So for a leftovers album, is what you thought it was. It was pretty strong. It's pretty good album.
Rock the Blues
I
Away was another good one.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
a single.
So if there was a big surprise for me, it was probably more that they decided to come back for another album after that.
It is amazing. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Rock or Bust, by the way, number 3 US and UK, one in Australia. But yeah, let's talk about that now. Their return in 2020, which was a shock, I think, to everybody. Brian Johnson had to be replaced by Axl Rose on the previous
Yeah.
tour due to hearing issues. That was in 2016. Drummer Phil Rudd, he was out. He had some major legal issues stemming from a
Oh, really?
criminal case. Chris Slade, who was on Razor's Edge, he comes back. Cliff Williams said he was done and retired after the tour. But the worst of
Yeah.
all, Malcolm passed away in 2017. Yet, Power Up, it not only happens, which is a shock that we even get this album, it's another huge success. Number one in the US, UK, and Australia. The lead single, Shot in the Dark. 4 more singles, Realize, Demon Fire, which is Spell, Through the Mists of Time. So again, I asked, how the heck did they not only end up making the album, considering everything that happened, and how do they pull off another really good album?
Yeah, I believe that obviously these are presumably leftovers that it has to be said that weren't considered good enough for Rock or Bust, and that's where I have this confusion. I just assumed that they used the best of what they got that Angus could find for Rock or Bust. So what does that make Power Up? Now, I wonder, does it mean that some of these tracks are actually only written by Angus? I know it says Angus Young and Malcolm Young, but you get something like Through the Mists of Time, which would appear to sort of reference fallen comrades such as Malcolm. So you think, did he contribute anything to that? Could he have
Yeah.
contributed anything? Does Brian contribute and just doesn't get any publishing? Some lyrics, I don't see anything that strikes me as been necessarily the sort of thing Brian would contribute. But I do wonder how much of these songs is the point I'm making, whether any of them were brand new and not stuff that had been held back.
Yeah, they listed as all tracks written by Angus Young and Malcolm Young.
They do. I think
Hmm.
Brendan O'Brien, Angus said, that who was the producer, had picked the songs that he liked. You know, a track I want to pick out in the album is "Kick You When You're Down."
Yeah,
It's not.
that's old
It's
school
not one.
AC/DC.
Well, I hear that, and I'm in the zone, man. I'm absolutely there. I mean, this is AC. They can do that all day
Yeah,
long for me, and I am in.
that came up when I
Absolutely.
was going for a ride the other day. I just popped AC/DC on and just hit random on Spotify, and that was one of the ones. Yeah, it is a great song. Brendan O'Brien also produced Rocker Bust, and those two, right? Were those the only two, or did he do the one before that as well?
I think he was
No.
involved in Black Ice as well. Was he involved in that one as well?
Yeah, Black Ice he's on.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So he did three. He did three,
Yeah.
which I remember him talking about because Brian's voice sounded really good on Black Ice, and
Mm.
he was talking about just giving Brian more time in between recording, so he didn't blow his voice out. Which I think he.
Brian, well, I mean, Brian had a point, as you well know, on the studio set where he sounded struggling a bit with the keys, maybe. And I think it's, for me, the Ball Breaker album is when I thought that the things had come down a bit and stiff up a lip, and I thought he sounded better than he had done in a long time. And actually, I think he's one of he plays a terrific game on Rock or Bust, and Power Up Brian is really just lead from the front, really, which of course he has to, because everything would seem to be on Angus, wouldn't it? I guess really, it's Angus's band now, clear as day. It's Angus's band. When it used to be Malcolm's band, with presumably Angus more in the background a bit. But Brian has really stepped up, I think, and done real man of the match performances on these last albums.
It's hard to explain medically what happened with Brian. He talked about it, but it was something where he had an inner ear infection or something that got worse. Played a show somewhere where it was super cold. Got on the airplane, and it was like it crystallized inside of his ear. It's a lot of medical terminology I'm not familiar with. You could find it. You could find it online or look for interviews with Brian. But anyway, long story short is I think he had something surgically implanted right into his ear. Like he found a doctor that had a rare, something that was brand new piece of technology, and it's obviously worked.
Yeah. And it needed to, really, because I think if AC/DC were going to carry on, for me, with any credibility, they need Brian. I mean, I'd go further and say they could do with Phil, but I'm guessing that my guess would be there's some more issues with Phil that have perhaps happened. I noticed that he's conspicuously absent on the website, on latest pictures and that kind of thing. So and Cliff had obviously just come back for the festival they played, the Power Trip Festival in October 23, which was a big surprise to see them do that. But that looks like that's probably Cliff's finale with the band. Now, whether Angus brings back Cliff and Phil and records another album, I don't know. I'm not sure. I
Yeah,
don't think he'll want to stop.
yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Just to finish up, yeah,
Mm.
what do you think? What's your prediction for the future of AC/DC? What would you like to see? I mean, do you want to see it end? Just have them go out with that album, maybe play a show or two here and there.
I wouldn't
Angus
like
seems
to
to
see
still have it. I saw the footage of him from what was the tour the big festival they played in October.
the Power Trip Festival.
Power
Yeah,
Trip
I want.
Festival, yeah.
I'd say I thought they were a bit rusty, but that's fair enough, because they would be. They hadn't played live for some time. And they obviously got the new drummer in as well, who's stayed with them for live gigs, which is Matt Laug, is it? I think, and new bass player Chris Cheney replacing Cliff Williams, and obviously having a younger rhythm section is going to be helpful, because they'll have more energy and more oomph to do that. But I'd say AC/DC are still credible with Angus, Brian, and Stevie, but I would just question. I'd question how long they can go on. They are getting older now, and Brian certainly is.
Phil and Angus puts on a high energy performance. So it will be very noticeable if all of a sudden he's just standing there not doing much. Like he said, you don't want to get out there on a wheelchair. But he said, but as long as I could feel it when I get on and I'm putting in that energy, I'll keep doing it.
I think he will. I mean, one of the things is there is scope for them, and it's bound to happen, of reissuing the back catalogue with bonus tracks and live tracks sets added. I would confidently expect we will get that, because they haven't really done it in the way that other bands have. I know they've just reissued the albums on vinyl for the 50th anniversary, but there's no bonuses or anything on it. They could certainly there must be some stuff in the archives they could look at using, even if it's only live sets. So I don't think we're going to get any shortage of product coming out. They could do a new album, definitely. I mean, that would probably be an easier route in some respects than to carry on touring. I would have hoped that maybe AC/DC might wind the touring down. I think they have a bit on this tour, just do kind of festivals and big events, and not tour as much as heavily as they have in the past. I just don't want to see them kind of become a caricature or a watered down version of what they were capable of. And as you said correctly, Angus's performances. I know people who've been to see them over the years and have been staggered, even up to Black Ice, who hadn't seen them before, and were just amazed at how somebody can go through a set and put that amount of effort into it as Angus does. It is extraordinary, as anyone will tell you.
Yeah.
Also got to say, one of the happiest places I've ever had, probably musically, in my life, is being at any AC/DC stadium gig. Normally, I'm not a big fan of stadium gigs. I like smaller venues and up close and personal. But you get yourself in a crowd for AC/DC and Thunderstruck comes on, or you know, any of those big other
Back in
tracks.
Black, and yeah.
Or for those about to rock. I mean, it is absolutely incredible to be in a crowd. And they're playing those songs. It really, really is. And they should be very, very proud of themselves for what they've done. I mean, they've kind of been trendy-ish at times, I would guess. They seem to be a bit more trendy now than they ever have been. Certainly with that ubiquitous logo. I interviewed Gerard Huerta for the book, who did the logo, and he's amazed at how his logo is on anything and everything and everywhere.
What did he have to say about the creation of the logo?
He was he'd actually done a lot of logos. He'd done the Blue Oyster Cult live album. He did the logo for that. He'd done various other bands' logos as well. And it was just a job, a well-paid job. He showed me the original logo, and he just pulled it out of a drawer next to him. And this was what was sent. This was the logo. It's in the book.
Yeah, very simple, direct, straightforward, perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
The little bolt in between.
And again, the point that some people have picked up on this, he was paid for doing the job to create the logo. That's how it was. Nobody said to him, "Oh, and by the way, in decades to come, we're going to put it on this, we're going to put it on that, it's going to be on this and that." And maybe if that had been known at the time, you might have said, "Well, hang on a minute, how much am I getting paid for this?" But he said, I got paid well for it. I got paid right for it. They paid up. And I said, "What did the band think of it?" He said, "I don't know."
They never said anything.
Never met them. And he said in those days, bands like AC/DC, they didn't. It was almost a case of, this is the cover. Oh, right, okay. And we've posed for the picture. We've done it. Oh, right, okay. He said it was only when you get to the levels of like a Pink Floyd or a Led Zeppelin, they would turn up and pay the big bucks money for like Hypnosis and Pacific Eye and Ear, and would be standing there and saying, "What about this and what about that? And we don't like this." Then he's like, "Okay, that's the logo. Great, yeah, I love that."
That sounds like AC/DC. Yeah, the book is titled AC/DC Every Album, Every Song. It is out March 29 in the UK. You can get it through Burning Shed, their website. I have a link to it in the show notes page. In the US, however, it's not going to be until May the 31st. But if you live in the US, you can order it through Burning Shed.
Yeah.
Still get it. So that you could do that. I'll put a link to the Burning Shed purchase if you want to get it there, but also the Amazon link when it's ready to go for May 31. And Where can people find you, Chris? Do you have social media pages and anywhere that
Yeah.
people can reach out to you?
Well, I'm on Instagram, and one of my best friends on Instagram is you. So that's one way people
Yes.
can find me. I'm certainly on there. Where else can you find me? You could find me at my day job, Smethwick Heritage Centre.
We'll
Big
stop
shout out
by. Okay.
to the museum that I manage in just outside Birmingham in Smethwick. So people can find me there as well. I'm not on Facebook really, so Instagram's the best way. I'm on there.
Yeah, we should also give a quick plug to the other books that you have. Alice Cooper, you were
Yeah.
on for that one. And what was the first time you were on for? Which one was it?
I've been on three times before. I've done Alice Cooper in the 70s, Alice Cooper in the
You're
80s,
right.
Black Sabbath in the 70s, and I'm currently I'm writing one right now. Actually, I'm writing two at this moment.
Wow. Okay. Oh, so this is your fourth appearance.
Yeah.
Man, I think I gotta check the numbers. That might be a record. I don't know. I'm four
Uh,
appearances. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I've
And
got
I
two.
tell you what, the episode that we did on the Alice Cooper book, well, and the Black Sabbath too, now that I think of it, I mean, they do great numbers. People they love the stories that you tell.
I got
And
to tell you, I actually get emails on the back of this podcast. Hey, people
that's
track me
cool.
down and they come forward, and that's really, really great when people take the time to tell you they like something. That's really good because it's such a negative, critical world often.
Right.
Um, it's great when somebody takes the time to contact you and say, "I really like this. Thanks for turning me on to an album I wasn't aware of, or something." And that's a terrific feeling. It really is.
Yeah, what an incredible time we're in now where we can do this stuff with the technology. And
Mm,
we do this, we're not sitting alone in a room doing this, so you don't know who's going to listen to it. But then it goes out there on the internet and you just put it out there and you see what happens. But yeah, I still get a lot of great comments as well. So,
yeah,
did you want to tell us what you're working on, or is it a secret, the two
yeah.
books?
No, I can do. There's one which has been delayed, which was a book on Sparks in the 70s, the Mail Brothers, and we're ironing out should we say, a couple of queries on that book
Okay.
that we'd had in. But that's getting sorted. The big one, the ridiculous one, is the Chic organisation, which I'm writing at the moment, which is Nile Rodgers, Bernard Edwards, and their work with Chic, Sister Sledge, David Bowie, Madonna, Diana Ross, Johnny Mathis, Sheila B. Devotion. There's a lot of albums they've worked on. That's ambitious. And then the one that's chopped and changed a bit, and kind of the dust has settled. Originally, I was going to do Black Sabbath in the 80s, and then that just looked like being almost too difficult for the word count you have to do for these books, to be frank, because there's so many singers, let alone everyone else in Sabbath in the 80s. And it kind of I had a chat with the publishers, Sonicbond Publishing, and it's become Black Sabbath, the Dio years.
Okay.
So
Specifically the Dio years.
and
Oh,
Heaven
that's
and
going to
Hell.
do well. Okay.
Um,
Yeah,
and
because they called the band Heaven and Hell, right?
yeah,
Wasn't that in the 2000s that they had to do that? There was a legal reason?
yeah, I think, and also partly, I think it made more sense to call the band Heaven and Hell because it differentiated it to the output that
Yeah.
they've done with Dio. I've done one interview already for that book, and I've got two in the next couple of days. The interview I did with Greg Hildebrand, who did the cover of Mob Rules, was really fascinating. I was so lucky to get this guy to talk to me. He doesn't normally talk to people, apparently,
Cool.
but he did because of one of the questions that I'd asked in the email.
When will that come out,
And
do you think, that Dio era?
I would probably guess early next year. Might be
Okay.
quicker than that, potentially. It's lining up the interviews. I've got two lined up. I've got Mike Exeter, who engineered and played on the Better the Devil You Know album, Heaven and Hell. He's been working with Tony Iommi for some years. And the one I'm really looking forward to is on Monday. I've got Wyn Davis, and his remix of Live Evil is astonishing. I don't know if you've got that Live Evil box
No,
set at all. Oh,
I
you
don't.
must.
Yeah.
Oh, you've got the original. If you listen to the album and then you put his remix on, oh, it's night and day.
Yeah, well, I need
You've
to
got
invest more time into the Dio years because I'm a Sabbath Ozzy era diehard, but I know of of a lot of the Dio songs, the Dio era Black Sabbath songs, but I really don't. I can't say I'm an expert on the Dio era Black Sabbath, which is why I look forward to reading a book like that. I want to learn more. I want to know more.
I think you're right. I think where the Dio era, I suppose you might have a problem with it, is Ronnie Dio singing songs that Ozzy sang. And that certainly is probably an area that you might find a little difficult potentially to get into, I would say. Ronnie James Dio tends to kind of stage almost perform the songs in a way, and those songs are quite tricky to do. They
Extremely
really, really
different
are.
styles vocally. Yeah.
Absolutely different styles. Yeah. So
Well,
it's all good fun.
looking forward to having you back on for any or all of those books. So, Chris Sutton, thanks so much. As always, it's always great having you here, and look forward to having you back on.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. It really is. As I say, I always finish one of these books and I think now I can get hold of Eric and go and have a chat.
I love it. I love it. That's great to hear. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Eric. Take care, man.